prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I know it's been a little while since we've talked. I'm Ted Nguyen. That's Tashan Reed. I just got back from Bali. I just got back from vacation. I know Tashan's been working hard out there in the OTAs and that hard Las Vegas heat. Is it hot out there?
Hell yeah, it's hot out here. It was 97 degrees. They practice at 10:30, but it doesn't matter. It's still hot. But that's a wealthy trip, man. It's going off to Bali. That's some money right there.
And I use all credit card points to get there. And once you get there, everything is ridiculously cheap. Like it's crazy how cheap things are, but I loved it out there. The people are great. It was a beautiful country. And I got to see my friends get married, which is the reason why I was there. Shout out to DC and Goodrich. And it was an awesome time. But now I'm back on the grind. I want to get to these OTA updates. Before I left, I got to break down some film with Geno Smith, and that's an article I have up on The Athletic. Talk to Geno about his next chapter, how he's working with Chip Kelly so far, and just breaking down some film with him. And man, I've broken down film with quarterbacks in the past, and I think the one thing that stood out with Geno is you could tell that he was coached by defensive coaches, obviously with Pete Carroll. And then Mike McDonald, because like when he talks about defenses and he breaks down the film, like you could tell he really understands the responsibilities of each defender in details, not just like kind of a general idea of what defenses are. So that was pretty cool to see. So check that out on The Athletic if you haven't yet. But yeah, it was awesome for him to give me a little bit of his time. What have you learned from OTA so far?
Yeah, I guess kind of a good segue is, Geno talked today. Him and Chip Kelly spoke for the first time since practice started. And, something that Kelly really harped on with Geno, and part of the reason why he likes him so much is his intelligence and just his football knowledge. And he thinks, that it comes from him obviously just being a smart guy, but also, he's played in a bunch of systems throughout his career. I mean, he's bounced around to a few different teams, has had a bunch of different offensive coordinators. And so he knows what knows what he's looking at and is able to process it and digest it and react in live time. And that's part of what makes him, such an effective quarterback. And, it's been a pretty quiet camp, I would say, for Geno and the offense generally, at least for the couple of practices that they've let us see. It's the edge has been in the favor of the defense, I would say. And that's not too uncommon this time of year in OTAs. I feel like usually your defense is further ahead at this point of year. It's not like the offense looks awful or anything, but you can tell they're still just kind of working through the kinks, getting into the system. And that also probably is a product of them having a pretty young receiver room as well, and guys learning how to separate from NFL defenders. But, everybody's positive this time of year, but it seems like that relationship between Smith and Kelly is going pretty well. And, with Kelly, the big question that everybody has is he going to be different in the NFL this time around? And he's saying all the right things. I mean, he talked today. He said, you got to adapt your system to the personnel. He's constantly learning, pulling from other offenses. And, it's not that same old offense that he ran back with the Eagles and the 49ers back in the day. So, again, everything sounds good this time of year, but, it's at least something for fans to feel a little bit encouraged about.
Yeah, I think the offense is definitely going to be different. I think the main philosophy is so much different, at least with what he showed at Ohio State. It's not just this tempo spread offense that you're just trying to run, 100 plays per game and just beat teams with tempo. It's a lot slower. It's a lot more purposeful. They're trying to set plays up instead of just trying to gash you with tempo. And we saw examples that in Ohio State. I mean, I posted a video about this, but there was a play they ran against Oregon in their first playoff game, and then they drew up a counter for it against Notre Dame, and that was how they scored the first touchdown. They drew up a counter off of the reverse that they ran to Jeremiah Smith, who is Geno Smith's cousin, by the way. But yeah, I think Kelly's offense is going to be different, and I did ask Geno about whether Chip Kelly's going to give him the autonomy of the line of scrimmage that Geno is used to having. As one of the best parts of his game is his ability to change plays and get the offense into the right plays. And he didn't give me an outright answer, but he did say that Kelly respects the work that he does, and he knows that that's going to be one of his strong points. So I think that's eventually going to be come into play. He didn't give me an outright answer yet, but I would imagine that Kelly would give him that power. I don't know if Kelly has given a quarterback that power before because everything was tempo for them. And in college, you're just not going to give, even with an adjusted offense, you're not going to give that power to a college quarterback just yet. So Smith will definitely be a much different quarterback than he's had in the past. But I think he will.
Yeah, you would think so, especially with him having Jackson Powers Johnson as a center. He's only a second-year player. Like, I'm not saying that he couldn't, handle the checks at the line of scrimmage for the offensive line himself, but you would think it would make more sense to hand it off to the veteran quarterback with as much experience as Geno Smith has. That didn't come up today while Geno was talking. He probably would give a similar answer anyway, trying to play a little coy with it. We can't really, at practice when we're watching, from the angles, how far away we are, we can't really tell if guys are doing that kind of stuff. So it's kind of hard to, and they aren't going to be doing a whole bunch of audibles anyway in a practice setting. So it's definitely something that'll be interesting to see. Just one little nugget that we have gotten from OTAs is they are going to play their starters in the preseason, kind of similar to what Antonio Pierce did last year. And so we should get a look at it, potentially. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't play that the preseason opener that they have against the Seahawks in Seattle. That kind of would be a fitting game to have Geno and Pete both returning against their old team. So we'll see. I think, in terms of the rest of the offense, a lot of it's going to hinge on the offensive line, of course, which really can't evaluate those guys at this time of year. Like, Chip Kelly even said it today, like you're basically watching their first two steps and then that's pretty much it. Cause there's no live rush, there's no pads, there's no real contact. And so it's more about getting alignment, communication, fundamentals down for the offensive line. And I think that unit is still a big question mark. Our last show, we talked a lot about it. It's a young, unproven unit outside of Colton Miller, I would say, and Alex Kappa. But even with Kappa, he struggled the last couple of years, so we got to see him bounce back. And so it hasn't been a whole bunch of takeaways to have for the offensive line, but there has been a rotation at guard. At left guard has been mostly Dylan Parham and Jordan Meredith, and then at right guard, Alex Kappa has been leading the way. But we also seen Caleb Rogers rotating in there a little bit, and so we expected there to be some competition at guard and. Looks like guys are rotating in. Like that competition really isn't going to heat up till training camp because, like I said, that's when the pads come on. But at least it seems like those are the two spots where there's kind of going to be a competition battle going on leading up to the season.
Yeah, and there was some talk about maybe Jackson Powers Johnson playing guard or at least competing for that spot, but he seems pretty cemented into the center spot, and we've learned from I don't know if it's his podcast or somebody else's podcast. He pretty much said he told Antonio Pierce, "I'm going to play center." So it seems like that's a spot that he really prefers. I mean, he excelled at it in college. I mean, I think he has the physical ability to play guard, obviously, but that's the position he wants to play, and it seems like that's going to be a spot. One thing I did find interesting was I saw that you guys were able to talk to some of the assistant coaches, and Carroll's son, the offensive line coach, said he didn't watch much film of the offensive line last season. I think he only said he watched a couple of games. So I don't know if that's because he just wants to give them a fresh look and not have kind of a convoluted look at them. But I thought that was a little bit strange. Did you hear that comment? What do you think about that?
I mean, like in those, they have like assistants spread around the room, kind of with small little scrums at tables. So I wasn't around when he said this, so I don't know the context of it. So I can't really provide too much on it. But I'm sure he's watched film of their guys. Like I don't think he meant that as literally, maybe as it came off. So probably wouldn't read too much into that.
Yeah, he did mention that he has Philbin to lean on, who did coach a team from last year. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe they just don't believe that a lot. There's a lot of carryover from last season because maybe they thought they were that poorly coached. But anyways, another big story and another huge player that the Raiders are leaning on that could sway the season, in my opinion, is Christian Wilkins. And you reported that Wilkins is behind schedule as far as his recovery. He's back in a boot. Pete Carroll talked about it and seemed pretty somber about his recovery. I mean, it's going to be a long process. There's still some time left. What have you been able to assess from Wilkins' injury? And obviously he's not doing much at OTAs right now.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of, I don't know, people just aren't reading, I guess. But so like the thing with Wilkins was like last season after the surgery, which was in October, he got placed in the boot. By the end of the season, he had worked his way out of the boot. Earlier this offseason, he had to be placed back in the boot. The reason why I haven't gleaned that yet. It's not certain, but clearly some sort of setback of some sort must have happened for him to be placed back in the boot. But he was able to get back out of that by the start of OTAs, and so he's walking around without that on his left foot. And last week during the first OTA practice with veterans, he was there and he was present, but he didn't have a helmet. He wasn't participating in any of the drills, and just watching him move, like he really can't. It doesn't seem like he can run really. Like when the defensive linemen, they kind of take off jogging to go do their individual drills on one side of the field. He was walking over there with them, but he was like walking the entire way. Like there was no jogging, there was no running, and maybe he can, and he just is taking it easy on it. But I think that was when it was like a sign of like, okay, like there's still a significant road to be, traveled here for him to get back to being ready to play. And after practice, that's when Pete Carroll gave the comment of, essentially it's been a challenge in the recovery process. And I would say it's fair to say it's taken longer than they anticipated when he first got hurt. That was 7 months ago now. And it varies depending on the person, but typically guys have progressed a little bit further along than where he's at this point in the recovery timeline from a Jones fracture. So definitely something that you have to be concerned about. He wasn't there at practice today, and with only 2 weeks left in OTAs, like pretty safe to say, like he's probably not going to be out there until training camp at the earliest. And so, we talked about it before. Anytime you have a guy that big, who has a foot injury, it can get tricky. And it seems like his recovery process has gotten tricky, unfortunately, and it's really not clear when he's going to get back out there.
Yeah, and I think Raider fans are always ready for that worst case scenario with the luck the franchise has had the last 2 decades. But he's such a pivotal piece in this Raiders team because obviously he was the big free agent signing last year. And this team really doesn't have a ton of defensive tackle depth. I know they've added a couple guys to their draft, but they lost John Jenkins. This team needs Christian Wilkins to play at a high level. There's questions at linebacker. There's questions in the secondary. They need this defensive line to be a dominant force, and Christian Wilkins is a big part of that. If he's not a dominant force for this defensive line and they don't take over games, the second and third level for this team just does not have enough star power to really support this defense. So it's going to be a huge story to keep track of. And, if it lingers and if he does have to miss a portion of the season, it's going to be tough sledding without him.
Yeah, because he's really the only defensive tackle they have on the roster who's proven to be a full-time starter. Like I know Adam Butler started a bunch of games last season, but he's really ideally more of a situational rusher. You know what I mean? Like coming off the bench pass rusher. Like he's probably going to have to start on this team even if Wilkins is healthy. But he wasn't at practice today either. Undisclosed reasons. Not sure. Again, these practices are voluntary, so a guy not being there doesn't necessarily mean that they have an injury. So, but it kind of showed like the lack of depth that a defensive tackle, and they were using a lot of 5-man fronts today. I think part of that is because they don't have a great answer at nickelback, but it was it's like Fotu out there, Zach Carter, and Jonah Lulu, and it's like if that's your group of defensive tackles, like to start the season, it's probably going to get pretty rough. And that's not to mention the questions that they have at linebacker. And so I think run defense is a big question mark for the Raiders right now. If Wilkins isn't ready to go, and it seems like, at least this recovery process might drag into training camp at this point.
And the good news is the Raiders did get Malcolm Kuntz back at practice today. Last week, he didn't do much. I think he was probably at the pool working out from what I've read. But he was back at practice. What did he do today?
Yeah, he was mostly, I don't think I saw him in team drills. I'm pretty sure it was just individual drills for him. So kind of slowly working him back into it. He's coming off torn ACL last season that forced him to miss the entire season. And, seems like he's moving well. Don't notice anything glaring about, how he moved in individual drills, but seems like they're taking their time with him. He's not doing team drills just yet, and we'll see. Maybe he ramps up to that by the end of OTAs. But nonetheless, it's just a good sign for him to get back out there. That there weren't any major setbacks in his recovery from the ACL, and he's another player who's going to be huge for them this season because the defensive in depth isn't that great either. And I think Tyree Wilson is, he made a little bit of progress last year and is a useful player in ways, but they need Kuntz to be that Kuntz from 2023. If this pass rush is going to be at the level that they want it to be, and so positive step for him in his recovery, and we'll see how he ramps it up from here.
Yeah, and if Kuntz plays well on the outside, it really allows Tyree Wilson to play inside a lot more, and that can offset potentially Christian Wilkins missing some games or needing to take some snaps off. So huge to have him back. Jeremy Chin and Adam Butler also missed practice for undisclosed reasons today, I believe.
Yeah, I mentioned Butler, but Chin also I don't have any insight on why he wasn't out there. Pete Carroll didn't talk today, so we weren't able to ask him about injuries, and Chip Kelly as an assistant, he's not going to get into that. So not sure why he wasn't out there. But since he wasn't, Lonnie Johnson Jr., one of the safeties they brought in this offseason, kind of handled, the strong safety duties in his absence. And Chin is a guy that, in addition to safety, it seems like he's also going to kind of work down as a big slot, and saw Johnson doing a little bit of that today. They have kind of similar body types. And so got to look at some of the other safeties because he wasn't there. But again, it's voluntary OTA, so don't want to raise too many alarms over Chin and Butler, but we'll see if they're back out there next week.
Chin playing the nickel is so big because nickel's obviously a huge position of need for the Raiders, and if Chin's able to play that spot and play it well, that helps takes care of things. But they also have to have a third safety emerge if it's going to be Chin going down there. Somebody has to play deep if they're going to play two deep coverages. So that's going to be another thing to watch out for. Another storyline is Jaylen Ramsey tweeted that he might be starting a new chapter pretty soon, and as we know, June 1st is likely the date when he will get dealt, or after June 1st. So we'll see what happens with that. But
Yeah,
it solves a big position of need. Just saying, but we'll see.
it seems like that might be a little far fetched at this point, but I guess you never know. We'll see.
Yeah, he said new chapter. The Rams are another team, but that might be an old chapter. But we'll see. Anyways, potential extensions for Colton Miller and Jacoby Myers. There's no update on that front just yet. Do they seem like they are? Is that something that's on their dock? Like they're looking to do it pretty soon?
In terms of the Raiders, like it doesn't seem like they're in a rush to do that. Like obviously we had, Colton Miller, he didn't report for the beginning of OTAs, but by the time they actually started practicing, he had reported and got out there. So that story went away pretty quickly. But I think both him and Jacoby Myers are guys that, it could make sense to extend them before they have the chance to get to free agency. Obviously, if they want to, sign a deal at this point. And Jacoby Myers, he talked today, and he wouldn't really get into it, but he said he wants to be here, but that's between obviously him, his agent, and in the top floor of the building. They kind of burned them a little bit last year, not extending guys like a Nate Hobbs, Robert Spillane, Trayvon Merrick. They could have extended those guys during the season. And then they waited till free agency, and the prices got a little bit out of control, and they lost those guys. And so same thing could happen if either one of these guys hit the market. And so we'll see. I think Miller, he was coming off of a bumpy season last year, and so maybe you want to see him return the form before you extend him. But Jacoby Myers, I would say that was the best year of his career, in my opinion. He's not a wide receiver one, but he's one of the better wide receiver twos in the league. And he's a versatile guy. He can line up inside and outside, and he's not 30 yet. So I think extending him, on a short term 2-3 year deal would make a lot of sense, but hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, well, the Raiders hired Brandon Hunt to be their vice president of player personnel. And the Eagles are a team that like to extend players early so they avoid kind of late contract situation drama and having to overpay players. So when you pay players early that you believe in, you're able to save money because contracts always go up. And then when you get kind of close to that deadline, things get dicey. So be like the Eagles and just sign these guys early, avoid the drama, and avoid the free agent defensive apocalypse that the Raiders kind of faced this offseason. Um, let's get to fan questions. Early impressions of the rookie receivers, Besh, Thornton, and even Tommy Malott. What are your early thoughts on the potential roles this year from Graham?
Yes, I think honestly Dante Thornton's kind of jumped out the most amongst the rookie receivers so far. Part of that is just, I mean, he has a unique build as a guy that's just under 6'5". But he's muscular and ran a 4.3 flat, and that shows on the field. And pretty much, I've only been to 3 practices so far, but every practice I've been out there, you've seen him make kind of those splash plays, maybe whether it's a go ball or a post or kind of those deep routes. With his speed and size, he's able to get open and come down with those jump balls. And I think really the next step for him is getting more nuance in his route running, particularly playing at Tennessee. They kind of run a kiddie offense a little bit, and it's pretty basic. And in the NFL, you can't get by with only 2 or 3 routes in your arsenal. And so, and he's going to be a guy that's a starting caliber receiver. He's going to have to step up in that area. And I think the coaching staff has been impressed by him so far. I got the chance to talk to receivers coach Chris Beatty yesterday, and Chip Kelly gave him some kudos today as well. And so I think he's really come on strong. He's a guy that didn't have much college production at all, really, but you can see why, with his traits, why he jumped out. And so I think he's come along the strongest and made the biggest impact so far. I think Jack Besh is trying to find his way. He's kind of a sort of a tweener player where throughout his college career, he played both inside and outside. And I think they're trying to figure out, like, where is he best, with the Raiders. And, he kind of has a similar skill set to Jacoby Myers in that way, I think. And so kind of just figuring out how the pieces fit into the puzzle, I think, is kind of the challenge for him right now. I think Dante Thornton has a more obvious role. Like, he's a big, tall, fast guy that can win deep. So you line him up outside and tell him to go, So I think it's been a little bit of an easier acclimation for him to this point. And Besh is still coming along. And then for Tommy Malott, I mean, he's so early in the process as a guy that never really played receiver full time during his college career. He's a quarterback. That's a massive transition. And, while he is, a special athlete, I mean, fast, he can jump high, the nuances of the position, he's really early on in that process. And, kind of had flashes. I think it was last week. I saw him kind of get Darnay Holmes on the in-out route where he made him fall a little bit and got open. And so just off his athletic ability, you kind of see flashes, but he's still early on in the process as a guy that's going to be vying for a roster spot. But, the Raiders, I think the tricky part for him is they have a lot of guys that work in the slot. I mean, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, Jack Besh. And so for Malott, it's like, all right, you really got to stand out to get some of those slot reps. And so we'll see how it progresses for him. But those guys are going to get a lot of opportunities because they need to. I think Myers is really the only proven receiver in that room. And so they're going to need a couple of these rookies to step up. I think Trey Tucker is still in the mix, and we've seen him make some plays in OTAs so far, working as an outside receiver. So he's going to have, a seat at the table as well. But they really need at least one of these rookies to step up in a big way to solidify that receiver room.
Yeah, you mentioned there's so many guys that work in the slot, like Bowers, Myers. Besh looks like he might be a guy that has to work from the slot as well. That's why it's so important for one of those outside guys to really take off. I mean, Thornton, if he could be, a guy that, kind of like McCole Hardman that takes the top off of defenses, and maybe you'd run some gadget plays for him here and there. You just really need to create some space, and he could do that if he could get off press coverage, and that's going to be a question mark for him once the contact is allowed. Trey Tucker was supposed to be that guy, and Trey Tucker has gotten better in each season so far, but he really hasn't taken a step to be a reliable target just yet. Maybe he just needs a guy like Geno Smith who could place the ball for him to really take off. But I think watching how Tucker and Thornton develop in that role as a guy that takes top off of the defense is going to be something to watch out for when we get into training camp. Next question: how is Michael Mayer looking, and what's his role been so far from Javi Ramirez?
Yeah, I mean, he's a backup at this point. Like, I mean, Brock Bowers obviously is the guy at tight end, and I think they've been more focused on getting those receivers reps in practice. So we haven't seen a lot of 12 and 13 personnel, but I think he's going to have a role in the offense for sure. Particularly, we'll see how the offensive line comes together. But if the offensive line is an issue, I think we're going to see more of those 12 personnel formations to kind of help out with blocking as well. But I wouldn't expect huge receiving numbers from him just in the scope of this offense, unless there's injuries. But these kind of just need him to be a useful role player, which the expectations were a lot higher for him where he was drafted, somewhere in it. I think he was 35th overall pick in the draft a couple of years ago. But when you have Brock Bowers, you don't really need another tight end to have massive receiving numbers. And so it'd be surprising if he has like a big breakout year, just given, what they have elsewhere. But he's going to have a role on the team for sure.
Yeah, it's almost nearly impossible for him to have a huge role in this offense because Brock Bowers commands so many targets. And 12 personnel and 13 personnel are becoming a bigger part of the league because defenses are getting so light now and playing so much too high that teams are combating it with a little bit heavier personnel using those tight ends as run blockers. And obviously Mayer hasn't really lived up to that yet. He kind of struggled as a run blocker as a rookie. I think he improved last season, but he missed so much time. It was kind of really hard for him to establish himself. So in this next season, if he can be a useful player, like you mentioned, a utility player that can block, and get catch somewhere between 200 and 300 yards, he's not going to catch a lot more than that, just with all the targets that the Raiders have to spread out throughout the offense. He could be, that could be an extremely useful thing for this offense to have, to be able to be a successful 12 personnel team. And like we talked about multiple times in the past, for your 12 personnel to work, you have to be able to run the ball efficiently, and the Raiders just haven't been able to do that. And we'll see whether they can do that with Ashton Genty in the fold. Now, that is a huge deciding factor to whether you can be a real 12 personnel team. All right, next question. Who were the starting five and who were the starting defensive backs in OTA so far by Ron Swanson?
Yeah, so we kind of hit on the offensive line, but I think the three guys that I feel pretty confident and are locked in as starters is left tackle Colton Miller, center Jackson Powers Johnson, and right tackle DJ Glaze. And at guard is a rotation right now. Like if you ask me if the season started today, I think it'd probably be Dylan Parham and Alex Kappa, but a lot can change between now and the start of the season. So we'll see how that plays out. I don't think that's the most attractive unit, when it comes to on paper, but they just need them to be serviceable this year. I think that's sort of the bar for that group. Obviously, if they're better than that, great. But, being somewhere around league average, I think is probably the best case scenario. I know we talked about that with Brand Thorne last time we recorded, and I think that's the baseline to, be able to run the ball and protect Geno enough for this offense to get back in the realm of being respectable. So that unit's pivotal, of course, and we'll see how it comes together. And then flipping over to the other side at cornerback, it's mostly been Darien Porter and Eric Stokes so far at outside cornerback. I think Jacorian Bennett is still working back from the shoulder injury a little bit. And so he's mostly been working with the backups, but I think he's looked pretty good, and I wouldn't rule him out from getting in the mix for a starting job. And DeCamry Richardson's going to get a shot as well. And so I don't think anything's settled at cornerback, but the rookie Darien Porter's getting a lot of reps. I wrote a story earlier this week about, how he fits the mold of Pete Carroll's defensive backs, being tall, long, and fast. We've seen him, sort of take these projects before, guys that play receiver in college and transition to corner, and then, were a little bit raw at the position, but they had the measurables. That was Richard Sherman, that was Reek Woolen more recently, and now Darien Porter is kind of his latest case study. And so he's showing enough to get some first team reps. He's been able to hang in there pretty well so far. He got a little bit at the end of practice today by, I think it was Alex Bachman, actually, that got him on a deep route. So still learning, still in the process of coming along. But I think they feel pretty confident that two out of those four guys are going to emerge and be at least solid starters at cornerback this year. The bigger question mark is really nickelback. And I think, at this point, it seems most likely that's going to end up being a safety, kind of being that big slot, more often. Maybe Darnay Holmes gets in there as well. But I think just when you look at their roster, that's probably the best five that you can get on the field when it comes to the defensive backfield is having a third safety come in and playing that slot role instead of, kind of forcing it with a cornerback.
I think if you're a Raider fan, you want to see Darien Porter start. I mean, I know he's only played 1 year. He's very raw, but when you watch the film, like his movement skills and his athletic ability and his technique is pretty advanced for a guy that's only played 1 year. Like you wouldn't be able to you can't tell that he just played 1 year just based on watching his tape. He was so smooth in coverage, but again, obviously he didn't face a ton of NFL receivers. But I think there's enough there to where you could justify just letting him learn, because eventually he's going to have to get out there and just learn based on experience. But that's only coverage wise. The thing that concerns me is his tackling. Like his tackling is not great, and some of that has to do with experience and technique. But nowadays there's so much. Everybody's using compressed formations. Everybody's using these perimeter runs, getting to outside. Your corners really have to be able to tackle. So that's going to be a challenge for him. But if we're just talking coverage wise, I think I'd be try to get him out there early and just let him make his mistakes and learn from it and develop that way.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of a rotation at cornerback to start the season. That the Seahawks, even when they had a good secondary, they did that, with the Legion of Boom. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's going to be a big deal for Porter to get bigger and stronger. Like he is a pretty skinny guy, especially for 6'3", and so Pete Carroll, like if you can't tackle a cornerback, like he's probably not going to have you out there, right? So he's going to have to come along in that way in that area in a big way in order to carve out that full-time starting role for sure.
Yeah. All right. So next question: what are the linebackers looking like, especially Amari Gainer from Scorpio?
Yes, I mean, kind of similar to running backs. Like it's kind of hard to read too much into how the linebackers are playing right now, just given
It's
there's
like
no
flag
tackling.
football right now, basically.
It's just really like they're just running around, and you can evaluate how they perform in pass coverage, but even then, there's only so much you can glean, and so I really don't want to put too much into the stock of the guys, but in terms of who's out there, it's mostly been Devin White and Landon Roberts as the two linebackers on the field. Even though the Raiders don't have a great answer nickelback, they seem like they've been reluctant to bring a third linebacker on the field so far. It's mostly been either a 5-man front, and so they use the extra body there, or they bring in the extra safety and go with that big slot defender sort of look. And so it's been sort of limited reps for the linebackers, and so I haven't gotten much of a look at Amari Gainer at this point. I'm sure that'll change as the rest of the offseason goes on, but I think ideally you want one of those young guys to step up, whether it's Gainer or Tommy Eichenberg or Cody Lindenberg. But I haven't really seen enough of those guys to really make a firm evaluation. And again, like even if they were out there, like I could basically only evaluate half their game, because they're not doing what you pay linebackers to do, right? So it's too early to say really with that linebacker group.
All right. Next question, Lamar asks, how have all the quarterbacks looked in OTAs so far?
Yes, I mean, it's like I said, it's been mostly, I would say the defense has been winning the practices that I've seen personally. Like we don't get to see every single
But
practice.
you're not keeping track of these stats, dude? You're not writing down quarterback OTA stats?
I'm not doing that bullshit. It's a waste of time. No pass rushes come in. No, I'm not doing that.
I saw ESPN Cleveland post all their quarterback stats, with Jameer Sanders and all that. I was like, man,
shouts to
training
them.
Camp stats, maybe I could live with that, but OTA stats, come on, man.
Yeah, OTAs is crazy. But I mean, Geno's been okay. Like I think it's practice, so you're going to take more gambles. I think it was last week. I think he threw like 3 interceptions. This week there weren't any interceptions, and so kind of still feeling it out, getting used to his teammates, getting used to going against the opposing defense, and still learning the system with Chip Kelly. And so hasn't really been anything too notable so far from the quarterbacks. I think there's a pretty clear pecking order. Like obviously Geno's a starter, and Aiden O'Connell has a pretty locked in on that backup job. Those guys really take up most of the reps when it comes to team drills. Like we really haven't gotten to see much of Cam Miller or even Carter Bradley so far. And Aiden looks like Aiden. Like I don't think it's really going to change at this point in his career. Like he's a solid backup, and that's what he's going to be. But I'm sure they want to see some more flashes from the offense, and so we'll probably see that as Geno gets more comfortable. But it's been pretty average, I would say, so far from quarterbacks. Nothing too notable.
Yeah, gonna be Smith third system in 3 years, so
Yeah.
very expect some growing pains. But yeah, I mean it's good to hear he's not throwing interceptions after that 3 interception day. But days like that happen when you're learning a new offense. Last question: biggest difference between pass regime and this one from Mashman 4077.
I mean, I think a lot of, it's interesting to see the coverage. Like a lot of people talking about how, you know, positive the energy is now and all that stuff. But I feel like that was really there last year under Antonio Pierce. Like he was really well liked by the players. Guys really liked him. The staff liked each other. Like positive vibes wasn't really the issue. I think the biggest difference with this regime so far has just been, I think their process makes more sense when it comes to, and that's not just, when it comes to how they're coaching the team, but also their personnel moves in the offseason. I think last year we were kind of all raising our eyebrows a little bit, especially, signing Gardner Minshew and kind of how they handled the quarterback spot, but some of the other positions as well. But this year, I don't think they've really done anything where I'm like, oh, why would they, I can't understand why they possibly did that, spending a big money contract or using their first round pick in a super weird way like the Raiders have been known to do. And so I know that's a low bar, but like everything has been logical and makes sense. And it feels like there's a sound process behind it. And, this roster is still one that's incomplete. Like they have holes on with offensive line, linebacker, cornerback. But it seems like they're building this thing the right way. And they should be able to field a competitive team this year. Like, I think they're going to be competing for the AFC West crown? No, but could they potentially lay the foundation for doing that sometime in the future? I think so. And so I think that's been the biggest difference so far is just I can see the vision, like what it is. Like it makes sense. Like that doesn't guarantee the results are going to be positive, but I can't really fault them for how they've gone about it so far. So I would say that's been the biggest difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. They're keeping the good vibes going, but you have the experience behind the good vibes to hopefully make a difference and win some games. Yeah, interestingly enough, when I think the Raiders' win total was 5.5 before the draft. I think now it's up to like 7.5 or 8.5. So Vegas feels good about Vegas, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Like, I think this is like we talked about it. I think this is like a 9-win team, 8 or 9 win team, probably. So that line makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we have for you guys today. Make sure you guys subscribe, turn on your notifications, hit the like button on YouTube, subscribe and leave reviews on Spotify and Apple. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.